Hey YouTube, David here from Live Forever Die Trying, and today I have a video of a best of books, but kind of set with some perspective. So it's not uncommon that people reach out to me and want to know what the best books for somebody getting into nonfiction for the first time would be. And I think I have a somewhat unique perspective on that. If you've been watching me for a while, you know that I really only started reading at the beginning of 2019 as a New Year's resolution to try to just, in a vain sense, increase my knowledge, but also get a better understanding of my particular favorite subjects and kind of wrap my head around things. And since I started reading nonfiction, I feel that I've read a pretty diverse range. So from sciences to nature to politics to climate change to economics and everything in between. So I figured I'd do a best of 2019 video, but in the perspective that these are all good books to read if you're just getting into nonfiction for the first time. All of these books are going to be talking about different subjects, but they're all written in a way that isn't dry or academic. You're still going to get knowledge and get kind of perspective on each of these subjects from these books, but it's almost written in a entertaining way, kind of like a fiction book. They kind of each carry a story with them, something they're trying to explain. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. So the first book we're going to be talking about is going to be Phantoms in the Brain by V.S. Ramachandran. Now, Ramachandran is best known for his behavioral neurology work, as well as psychophysics, and his work at the University of California, San Diego. So primarily what this book is about is Ramachandran is working with patients and taking you on his journey. Each of his patients have had isolated brain damage, either caused by a stroke or a certain type of illness that shuts down a certain section of the brain. And that kind of shows us what that section of the brain was in charge of and can cause some really wacky situations. Whether it is talking about patients that deny that they have their own arm, or maybe they had an injury to an area of the brain that causes religious experiences, or even if the brain is fighting with itself with like a split brain patient. It is really, really enthralling information. He takes you along how he fixes these problems, and a lot of times it's very rudimentary therapy. But reading this book and reading what certain areas of the brain are in charge of makes you question a lot. If you can invoke religious experiences by stimulating certain sections of the brain, or if when your brain is split down the middle for like a cure of epilepsy, you have two different cells in the same unit that fight with each other on decision making, or just the fact that you can deny that you have half of your body and true to God that you believe that. This book can be unsettling at times, but throughout the entire read, you are hooked on it. It is a book written about neuroscience and psychology, but the way Ramachandran approaches it is a very jargon-free approach. So it's very easy to get into, and it has a lot of diagrams, so it is very easy to pick up for a beginner. All right, our second book is going to be The Botany of Desire by Michael Pollan, A Plant's Eye View of the World. Now, Michael Pollan is a journalism professor as well as a food and nature writer. This particular book of his is the second I read. I first read his book, How to Change Our Minds, which is primarily about his experiences with psychedelics from a scientific approach, slightly memoir-esque. Really good read, by the way, as well. And I've never really saw myself as somebody who looks at a food-related book and be like, yeah, I want to read that. It just doesn't seem thrilling or engaging for me. It's like, yeah, it's food, whatever. Now, if we're talking about like from a moral approach or like conservation, that's different. But you got a picture of an apple on the cover. Ain't my thing, typically. I picked this book up on a recommendation, and I'm glad I did. Basically, he's talking about reverse domestication in this book, or basically how humans on a large top-down view interact with plants, and how this is almost to the benefit of the plants and their propagation. So it's split into 4 sections talking about 4 different foods, and he kind of goes on a few different sub-stories within each of those chapters. Firstly, I believe we talk about the apple. Now, the apple, he tells the story about Johnny Appleseed and how he's basically a American Dionysus. Did I say that right? Critique me in the comments below. But basically how he's this like wandering satyr of a man who's planting these orchards up and down the coast in early America. And the reason he tells the story is talking about genetic diversity. Apparently, a few times in history, we almost lost apples because we would clone and graft them, and when a pest would come along, it'd almost wipe out the entire crop. So by Johnny Appleseed planting all these genetically diverse apple trees from seed, he may have saved the apple. It then goes on to talk about tulips in relation to kind of human economy and what humans think are beautiful. In the end, he talks about the disease that causes different tulips to have these different patterns that we thought was beautiful, but is really a flaw of the species or genetics of the plant. We talk about marijuana and the relations to human consciousness and creation of religion, which is a thrilling read. And then finally, we talk about the humble potato and genetic engineering and modification. And if you've seen this channel before, you know that's a big draw for me. I'm absolutely fascinated by what we're doing. But he tells it in a relation, almost a opposition between local farmers and small agriculture and then large corporations and actually patenting genetic code, and raises ethical issues within that. So yeah, it's a food book, but most of it ain't about food. Solid read and super easy to engage with. I love the way this is written. Up next, we have a book that you've heard me gush about in my last video, or second to last, my nonfiction on BookTube tag, where I talked about my favorite book of 2019. And that's going to be Sapiens by Yuval Noah Harari. So this is kind of like a anthropological look at what a human is. It talks about everything from our like prehistoric hunter-gatherer past, our evolution into agriculture and cultural like life, how that is arguably a bad thing, how that actually limits the expanse of human experience and kind of tied us to the ground. And then we go all the way through human history. We talk about culture, we talk about religion, we talk about future and technology, and it's just from a top-down look, it kind of shapes a lot of how you think about what a human is. I've gushed about this book plenty of times in the past, and it's just a thrilling read. One of my favorite parts is where he's talking about kind of agreed upon myths that humans have. As an example, we all know that there is government that controls most countries, but you can't pin down what the government is. Sure, it could be a building and you have a collection of workers that are elected officials, but if those workers die or that building moves, is the government something different? If the building burns down, they choose a new building, is that the same government? Most people would say it's the same, but that's because it's an agreed upon myth. Since each of us believe in the same government, it is a entity within an idea. The same thing can be said about money. Money doesn't have any inherent value. And he dives into this in regards to talking about religion and these shared ideas that benefit society, and how basically because we've agreed on these mythological ideas, how much that has benefited us and helped us grow as a species and become at the top of the food chain, even when as humans we're pretty pathetic creatures. We don't have a lot of strength. We can't really hunt on our own. And really, this book is just about human success, and it is an amazing read. Next up, we have a book that's strictly science. We have The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee. And this is a cover-to-cover history of genetics. And at a glance, that probably sounds pretty dry and boring, but Siddhartha in this book merges personal stories about his cousins and genetically caused illness in his family living in India with the biographies of people who discovered genetics, whether that is from the age of Darwin and natural selection to Mendel to Francis Crick and discovering the double helix, all the way up to what we're currently working on. What I really love about this particular book is the way that the author kind of breaks down what genetics are to the layman. Now, I've read a lot of books on genetics, as well as the future of genetics, horizontal gene transfer, and they can come off boring at times, and they can be hard to understand. If you're like me, I barely graduated high school and I didn't go to college, but I've done a little bit of self-study. And I don't understand everything about chemistry, or especially like biochemistry, but this book was accessible because of the analogies that he used to talk about what, a cell is. Where does the DNA reside within the cell? How does RNA transcribe proteins based on DNA? It takes a subject that is a big behemoth of a kind of academic idea and breaks it down so pretty much anybody can understand it. So if you're interested in genetics or want to break into some little less pop-sci science books, this is a good read. Finally, to round out this kind of rapid-fire top 5, we have When Breath Becomes Air. This book is written by Paul, who at 35 years old, as a doctor, came down with terminal cancer. This is a incredibly sad book, and I'm angry at it because it almost made me cry in a cafe, but it is an amazing read. It comes in pretty short, but basically it's written from the perspective of looking death in the eyes. In the end, what matters? It talks about him going on his journey through his career, still trying to be a doctor to fulfill his goals of making other people better, but at the same time being unable to help himself. It's really moving, and if you're looking for a nonfiction read that is going to make you tear up, this is probably the book for it. But even with an intellectual approach of being able to look death in the eyes and come back and write your story of what that was like, it is a really, really beneficial read and moves you to consider what you personally find valuable. And it can, I believe, lead you to make changes in your life for the better. This is a 5 out of 5 read, and out of the 52 books I've read last year, was definitely in the top 5, if not my favorite or second favorite book. So yeah, that's my top 5 nonfiction reads of 2019, aimed at beginners, because that's what I was. I definitely still consider myself a beginner. I've only read 52 books in 2019, and I'm almost 40 through 2020. So I'm definitely not anywhere near the numbers of what a lot of people on BookTube are reading. But yeah, it's been a thrilling journey so far, and I've got a lot of value out of it. If you have any recommendations you would like to see me read, drop those below. As always, if you like this, please subscribe, like, and let me know if there's anything I could do better. See y'all next time.